Welcome to Friday with Seniors. I'm your host, Peter Legge, and it's a pleasure today to interview Virginia Holden, GVHS. What does that stand for?
So it stands for the Greater Victoria Housing Society. We provide low and moderate income housing for seniors and families and persons with disabilities and newcomers and working singles and couples across Greater Victoria.
Okay. And Jenny Konkin, who's the Whole Way House.
Yeah. Hi, thank you for having me.
Which is the president and co-founder. Is that correct?
I am, yes. And we partner with nonprofit housing providers to provide support services for low-income veterans, seniors, people with disabilities, and families, and those in transition out of homelessness or recovery. Combating isolation and loneliness and building healthy communities for them.
I would think loneliness would be right up there in terms of importance.
Absolutely. It's one of our greatest determinants of health is having healthy community around us. And we see that especially in our seniors community, often as their community is getting smaller, feeling more disconnected. And it really puts people at risk for accessing the resources that they need when they become isolated.
Well, tell me, from your point of view, what trends do you see among seniors renters? And let's start with you, Virginia.
Well, I mean, I'm coming from a housing perspective. So, what I see is really a lack of options for low income and moderate income seniors, and especially affordable options. So again, many of those seniors are on fixed incomes, old age security, maybe they've saved a bit of money, but just with the high cost of housing now, high cost of food, recreation services, those numbers don't match up anymore. The math doesn't add up. And so, what seniors are finding themselves in is if their housing situation changes, they're being asked to leave by a landlord. Maybe they've had a mobility issues where they can no longer be in their current housing. Then there's very few options for them to move into. And the need on low income housing, say from BC Housing or the province, vastly strips the supply that's available. I'm also seeing lots of food insecurity and just, difficulty accessing community and health supports, whether there's, not enough of them or they have barriers accessing those services. And I agree with loneliness too, like Jenny, I'll pass that over to Jenny because I see that across the seniors that we're serving as well.
Jenny, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think one of the trends that we're seeing is that many seniors are aging in place. So they may have moved into independent housing 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and their health is changing, their needs are changing. They're no longer as independent. But there really aren't any options between independent housing, like what Greater Victoria Housing provides, and then long-term care is kind of your next option. And many people don't need to go into that. We don't have enough of it, but also we don't need to go into that without, there can be something in the middle. So we're finding a gap right there. And so that trend that we're seeing in seniors, in Greater Vancouver, seniors are actually our fastest rising demographic homeless population.
Same in Victoria.
Yeah, and so they now make up 22% of our homeless population, which is a very conservative number. Seniors are often very invisible homeless and don't get captured in the homeless count. But the shocking part about that is 45% of those are experiencing homelessness for the first time after the age of 55. So we know that there's a gap between independent housing and where people need to be and the types of supports that they need.
But 55 sounds very young to me.
Yeah, however, if you have health conditions, different life circumstances, often people in the lower income bracket already struggle with disabilities, and so that generally puts higher stress on their ability to age well in place without support services.
Well, what do you think we as people are viewing this broadcast can do to help you?
Well, I mean, in general, I would say And one thing I think we all learned during the pandemic was, being good neighbors, having healthy community around you, ensuring that we're taking care of our neighbors, checking in with people, I think is one small thing that everyone can do. If you live in an apartment building, find out who your neighbors are, check in on older adults. I have a 93-year-old gentleman who lives across the street from me, and we wave every day and say hello. And if he's not in the window, I go and check. So just having, I think, natural, healthy community is something we've lost. But also, I think another thing is just really looking into how can I serve? How can I volunteer? At Holway House, for example, we have so many programs that really are based on just building community. So sitting down, having a coffee together, eating a meal together, playing games together. That's such a great way, an intergenerational way to keep people active and engaged.
And on the housing front, it really is, being vocal and supportive of kind of pro-housing policies, being very active with governments to say, like, we need more supply, we need more options. There's just not enough options out there, particularly at the lower income range, to serve the number of people who need those kind of housing options. So just being very supportive. I know change is hard when communities change at the local level, and somebody's building an apartment building next door, or my duplex, somebody's going to put a duplex in or fourplex in next door. The reality is we need all those options, because what tends to happen here is, because seniors are often on fixed incomes, maybe they do have a few assets or they can't access them. Then it creates competition in the market. And so because we have so few options across what we call the housing spectrum, everything from, like housing that's targeted to folks who are coming out of homelessness, maybe they have special needs, straight to home ownership. When somebody's needs change, what's happening is the higher income folks outcompete the folks on fixed incomes. And so if we have more options across the board, then folks like seniors who don't have the potentially financial abilities don't have to compete with others with higher incomes to find housing that they need. And so, go out, be vocal about, more housing in your neighborhood, more housing in your city, but especially for these lower income and moderate income folks, because it is so hard to find that kind of those units available.
Well, when you say what ages are we talking?
I think 50, we term seniors in that 55 plus category, but we also include, people who have diverse abilities or disabilities, or, something that's giving them extra barriers to find housing that meets their needs.
We see so we have 11 sites across the Lower Mainland and one in Victoria. And I will say our highest needs is now targeted in that 75 to 90 range. We have a lot of seniors who have been living in their apartments for 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
I've got a few ladies who are 98 years old, still living in independent housing. They just need some support in order to be able to stay there. So we are seeing a big increase, and that's, I think by 2030, it's 1 in 4 people in Canada will be over the age of 65. So we know we're an aging population, and we need to have a plan to be able to help people to stay at home as long as possible and stay healthy.
And that's the brilliance of the work that Jenny's organization does. Is it's not necessary, we have this sense that it's like, okay, I can no longer live independently, I've got to go to long-term care, I've got to go to assisted living. Here's a model where you don't necessarily have to leave your home. You can have somebody like Jenny's team come in and visit twice a week, ask how things are going, create those kind of connections, create community, so people can stay in place as long as possible in their homes, and thrive as long as they possibly can.
It's really interesting because it really just mirrors what a family member would do. And often, you know, my grandmother lives down the street. I check in on her a couple times a week, but if you don't have that in place, and in Vancouver and Canada, we are such a unique country that we have people from all over the world, and often just those family connections aren't there. Also
Yeah.
financially, often family can't care for their seniors. So it's a really important piece that we just need people to advocate for us. We need people checking in on us, people around.
Do you have any tracking information as to how many people we're talking about?
Across the province?
Well,
In say British Columbia.
Well, some interesting research that was done by the United Way looking at sort of like aging in place. And I just have some numbers in front of me. I can't give like an actual, the firm number. But, I've got down here like 1 in 5 seniors. So that's, that 65 plus are spending more than 50% of their income on housing and at risk of homelessness. I mean, that's we're talking 20%. So, I mean, Jenny, I don't know if you've got any numbers like firmly in your pocket, but that's a pretty staggering number. If you're
Yeah,
thinking about it.
I was looking at the same research from the United Way. They came out with the seniors housing report earlier this year or last year, and it's a growing number of seniors who can't afford the rent anymore. As she said, more than 30% are spending it on more than 30% of their rent.
Mhm.
How many people we're talking about here?
You know what? I may have that number here.
Okay,
Okay.
I don't have access to it.
I
Again, data is tricky. This is this is part of the problem, right? Is like having really accurate data about how many people really are in need across the province.
So if we look at Metro Vancouver in the homeless population, that would represent a couple thousand.
Mhm.
But I want to find our numbers of our province. So give me a moment. I'll look for that. We can keep chatting. Oh,
So
here we
my
go.
other question is, what is working?
Okay.
And if you got a couple of examples of what is working, what has
Yeah.
been what is your organization's doing that's effective in the community?
All right, Peter, I found the number you're looking for. So we have in 2017, we had 878,000 seniors in BC. In 2022, we had 1 million, just over 1 million seniors in BC. So that was a 20% increase over 5 years. And then the senior subsidized housing units only had a 0.1% increase, just to give you an idea of we're not able to keep up. We're not able to keep up with the increase in seniors with our affordable housing. The housing wait list for senior subsidized housing had a 45% increase in those 5 years.
So what do you do about that?
Well, for us, so there's two things. We need to respond to the seniors who are homeless by providing them with appropriate housing. That needs to happen because right now the options are independent housing. So if a senior has any support needs, for example, they need someone checking in or any types of support needs, they're currently being lumped into what's called supportive housing, which is designed for people in addiction, mental health issues, coming direct out of homelessness, very low barrier to no barrier. It's inappropriate housing for seniors because most are not facing those types of issues. And so we need appropriate housing for seniors immediately. Seniors won't go into shelters. We do not have senior specific shelters. So that needs to happen. We need to be able to keep our seniors safe, that they feel safe coming into shelter. And then the second part is being preventative. So people who are currently housed in low-income rental housing, as I said, there's this gap. As soon as they need some supports, the landlord, like if you think about it, my landlord isn't the person who's going to check in on me or help me with my medical appointments or ensure that I'm getting to my doctor, or come and have social time with me. And so we need to have this model. For example, like ours, and there are others out there as well. But the Whole House model really is a partnership model that says, we aren't your landlord, we don't have any power over you, but we are here to support you so that you can stay home as long as it's safe, as long as it's well. I think that's what we would all want, is to be able to age well in our own homes. Financially, it is so much more fiscal, like financially responsible. The costs are astronomical when somebody goes into homelessness. We're looking at $145 per day. When you go into long-term care, we're looking at over $450 per day. And in acute hospital care, which is a really big issue for seniors not being able to be discharged because they have no support at home. So seniors are having to stay in hospital longer than needed. And that's anywhere between $1,200 and $1,500 per day, I'm told. And so when you look at just bringing in those support services that can help people not slip through the cracks into homelessness, not slip through the cracks into having to go. I heard a stat that 20% of people currently in long-term care don't actually need to be there if they had some form of support at home. So imagine their quality of life, the strain on our medical system, the number of beds that we don't have in our province. We can be preventative. We can be more proactive about this. And that's really what this model, we're part of a pilot program right now with BC Housing, and Virginia and I work on a working group together with them, trying to really help create this model that can be spread across the province, that multiple organizations can be using. Because I hear from landlords like Virginia all the time, we don't know what to do. Our seniors are no longer independent, but there's nowhere for them to go. We don't want to evict them, of course, but how do we keep them at home safely?
And for us as a housing provider, we're in the housing business, right? Like, we're in the job of keeping roofs over people's heads. We're a mission-driven nonprofit and charity. But what we do well is build homes. We do property management, and we make sure that we're good landlords for our residents. But where that starts to kind of fall apart is when seniors do need these higher levels of supports, and you're just trying to look after their health and safety and well-being. If they're struggling with medical issues, or a bit of dementia or things like that, make sure that they're staying safe, that then when they do have a fall, they're not on the floor for 3 days trying to call out for somebody. Because again, we don't have the support services. We're meant to be independent living and rental. And this happens in the private market too. How can we have these kind of light touch supportive services and community supports, so that seniors don't necessarily have to wait in the hospital for a month because they can't come home because they broke a hip. So it's just trying to find that kind of model where people feel supported, they can feel secure, they're paying affordable rent. But they have options as their needs change, and then they have the community come in when they need it during certain periods of their lives.
Yeah.
The question for both of you: how many people are we talking about in this province that fit this category?
Well, that's a hard number to say because it's really about decline. So if we look at how many people are low-income renters across our province, you're probably looking at a few 100,000. Probably about 25 to 30% of our seniors are on pension. They rely on, safer, different types of supplements to make their rent. And one thing that we're seeing is the numbers are hard to find because they're hidden. See, I will say this is a different generation. This is not a generation that's speaking out and saying, I need help. This is definitely a generation that doesn't want to feel like a burden. So often we actually have to find them and say, can we support you? How can we support you? We're here to help. And you asked, what's working. Let me tell you an example. Just in the last month, we had multiple tenants who, although the landlord is doing, because we work with nonprofit landlords, as Virginia said, they are trying to keep them housed. That is their goal. But when we deal with seniors who are falling into home cleanliness issues that are causing pests and rodents, maybe usually there's a disability involved. They're not able to physically keep their units clean. And there's hoarding issues. So we just had a veteran who was hoarding, and we brought in, so Wholeway House will set up a clean team. We'll bring in a group of volunteers to come in on a Saturday morning. We had a church group say, how can we help? We want to volunteer. And so they sent 15 volunteers, and I took 7 of them, and we cleaned out his unit I'm talking boxes to the ceiling, mess just covered. And I didn't know how he was moving. I don't know how he was getting dressed in the morning and what can happen in that situation. So not only is his quality of life deteriorating so quickly, but home support can no longer come in because it's not safe. They can't move around, so they can't help him get dressed. They can't bring him his medications. So you start to lose your medical supports. And often, and he is starting to have some signs of dementia. So we worked with him so closely because he knows us. We're the people he has coffee with in the morning. We're the people that he comes down for games with. We take him on special outings, and he trusts us, and he allowed us to come in and help him with that. And we got to unpack his boxes, and he had so much memorabilia from his service in the Canadian military. And so we hung it on the walls for him, but he got to have this beautiful home. And now he's no longer at risk of losing his medical services. He's no longer at risk of losing his housing because we were able to get in there, do a deep clean with our volunteers. And now my staff will go in every single week and check on him. How's your home looking? How are we doing? And make sure it never gets back to that state again. So those are the types of services that work. We can help. And I'm a firm believer, I'm born and raised in Vancouver, and I'm so thankful for people who came before me who made the life I have today possible, who did the hard jobs. And I believe it's our duty to care for our elders, to care for our seniors. And I don't think we're doing a great job of that. I think we need to be louder about it.
I mean, a lot of the things that Jenny talks about, and we see this within our seniors residence is, and it kind of comes as a shock to many people, is many of our seniors who we are housing in our buildings do not have they're alone. They do not have very strong family connections. Maybe their families moved away. Maybe they've had a falling out with their families, a disagreement, and there's really no one there to look after them. And, they're in their 90s, or they were newcomers to Canada, and maybe they came with a husband and they've passed away, and the rest of their family's in another country. And so we're seeing this more and more. People are living longer. As well as there are more seniors, the boomer boom, right? Like that. So we're seeing the front end of that. And I think it's a shock for many policymakers to hear that many of these residents and folks who are in the highest need are alone, without a lot of community or family supports.
Well, perhaps both of you could answer this question. Describe an ideal framework we can work towards?
Well, what I'd love to see is seniors who can live safely, securely, with affordability. They're not, paying egregious amounts of their, fixed income to rent. And they have options as they age. So if my knee's really bothering me and I can no longer do the stairs down to a basement suite apartment or some apartment that I've been living in for 20 and 30 years, I have another affordable option that I can move to, so that, it's not, maybe I'm paying $900 a month right now. But if I was to try to find another apartment that meets my accessibility needs, I'm staring down the nose, in Vancouver and Victoria and many other parts of the province of having to pay well over $2,000 a month. I mean, that math just doesn't work. So, we've got some issues there. So an ideal framework would allow seniors to have more options as they age, but then, have, somebody that's helping them connect to services, like Jenny's group, like other types of organizations, that are supporting seniors so that they can create community, that they don't feel isolated. that can help them gain access to food or do grocery shopping when they need to, and really support them as they age. I think it's just, that's really the ideal framework that I think we all want, right? We all want that for ourselves. We don't want to age in loneliness. We don't want to age where we're so worried about, if something happens to my housing, I'm going to be homeless at 70. I mean, that is, again, as Jenny said previously, that is such a growing segment of the homeless population. You know, maybe they saved a certain amount of money for retirement and they're living longer than they ever expected. And they've starting to run out of money, or costs have increased that they didn't save enough. And we're just starting to see that more and more.
We're also seeing a lot of financial abuse, and that's something that we work around or work towards preventing. We do a lot of workshops and education around that. I think for that framework, one thing, as I said before, we need to respond to those who are homeless right now and have a system in place. So for example, Senior Services Society works with seniors who are homeless, gets them into temporary housing, and then we help them find permanent housing. But then the second piece of that is being preventative, and those who are already housed, having support services on site that help them navigate the system. If you've ever had to navigate anything with the healthcare system, and I'm so thankful for our healthcare system, but it is difficult and you need somebody to help advocate for it. We work with a lot of seniors who are blind, who are deaf, who are just struggling in their ability to understand, who speak different languages, technology.
Literacy issues.
Yeah, technology is obviously a big barrier for a lot of people, and so many things have shifted completely to being online. So helping seniors ensure they're getting to their medical appointments, getting the care that they need, advocating for home support services, making sure they're getting the services that they need and they deserve. But then also, Peter, I'm a big believer in community, because what happens is hopefully Wholeway House can work itself out of a job, because if we can create healthy communities in housing, people start to take care of each other. And I think that's in our nature. I think that's something inside of us, that we want to take care of each other. So what we see is, by providing these simple programs, really, we do morning coffee programs so that neighbors can meet each other. We do games so that neighbors can have fun together. But as they get to know each other, they also start to take care of each other. Oh, Mr. So-and-so is sick. I'm going to bring him up a meal, or I'm going to go do the grocery shopping for this person. And it really is a beautiful thing when we can have that healthy community again. And I think we can get back there. I believe in that for sure. So to me, the framework is, if we have these pieces in place to support people with the vital resources that they need, then we can just build that community and we can all take care of each other.
Wow. Is there anything, let's start with you, Virginia. Is there anything you'd like to add to what you've said this morning?
You know, I think it's just, we need to kind of do a little bit of a different mindset, kind of around how we provide housing and services to seniors, that it doesn't have to mean that when my housing needs change, I need to move. I need to go into, long-term care. Really, people just, I think Jenny just, describes it so beautifully. They just really want to feel cared for. They want to be connected to other people. Um, you know, they also don't want to have to worry about basic necessities. Especially if your health is declining, or, mobility is becoming a greater issue for you. So, I think it's, I'm an East Coaster, so I grew up on the East Coast, and because, we lived through winter and fierce conditions and hurricanes and, nor'easters, we grow up with a sense that we have to look after each other. And I think after the pandemic, where it was like, oh, we need to live separately. We need to there was this big disconnection that's kind of happened. And I really hope that we're coming to terms that we really do need to look out for each other. We need to, as Jenny says, knock on the neighbor's door who's 93 and ask how he's doing. I've got my kids out knocking on their doors of our neighbors, can I help take out the recycling? Can I help mow your lawn? Can I, is there something groceries that you need? We used to do that. We used to do that as communities, and we really need to kind of get back to that frame of mind because as social beings who need connection and love, that's really what we need as we age.
Yeah.
Jenny, do you have any closing words?
Yeah, I think just to echo that, there's a lot of crises happening at once in our province. But I would just ask that people remember our seniors. When we hear about where funding is going, when we hear about policymakers, what are their priorities? And ask the question, do you have a plan in place? Is what about our seniors? What about the older adults who are going to need help? Because often it's just the squeakiest wheel that gets the grease. And so we need to be a voice for people who often don't speak up for themselves. And we want to be able to give them that autonomy, give them that support they need so that they can live independently as long as it's possible and add to our community. I don't want to live in a community where our seniors are all in long-term care. I get to learn a lot from older adults and I want to do that for a long time to come.
Yeah, as contributing members of our community.
Yeah.
One last question. How many people are we talking about?
This is the problem with data, right?
Yeah.
It's not a simple, thing, again, lots of seniors aren't getting themselves counted. So, if you look at lots of seniors that we're housing in the nonprofit sector, it's in the hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
But that doesn't take into account the number of seniors who are living very precariously in the private market.
Yes.
And so, we're talking hundreds of thousands,
Hundreds of
if not like a million
So we
people
have,
who are living, in this way.
so in BC in 2022 is the last number I can find. We had just over 1 million seniors. If we follow the stat that in Metro Vancouver, 22% of our homeless population are seniors, let's take that and we're looking at least 200,000 are homeless or very precariously housed in our province. And I would say that's very, very conservative. As we said, they're very invisible often. So I'm going to say we're looking at 200,000 to 300,000 seniors who are
Yeah.
either facing homelessness or very close to it.
And then on top of that, we've got aging seniors who are in like the private market, or the nonprofit housing who are very precarious. And so you could add another couple hundreds of thousands to that number as well. But you raise a really good point. We have a problem with data for this population, of which the United Way has tried to do some research on this. But that's one of the things that, Jenny mentioned that we're doing some work with BC Housing and the Ministry of Housing looking at aging in place with dignity. And one of those things is, what is the magnitude of this problem? And how can we get better data so we can better articulate this need?
It sounds to me that there's the better part of 1 million people out
Yeah.
there in this province that need your help.
Yeah.
Peter, you live in Vancouver. If you think about the SROs, the single room occupancy buildings, those buildings, if you think back in the 70s, were populated mostly by men working in industry here. Now those people have aged in the SROs. So just that number alone in Metro Vancouver, we're seeing those seniors are living in such inappropriate housing in the thousands. So if you want to think about just that level of crisis, and then every shelter in Vancouver will tell you their number one growing population is seniors coming into the shelters.
Virginia, Jenny, you got a big job ahead of you. We're talking 1 million people here in this province that need
Roughly.
some or all of your help. And I appreciate your youthfulness. I appreciate your energy, and I appreciate your dedication. And I thank you so much for being on this broadcast today.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Peter. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would recognize that this podcast is sponsored by the Senior Services Society of British Columbia. And I thank you ladies very much for being here.
Thank you. And anybody who wants more information, you can visit wholewayhouse.ca. And you can also learn more about our partnership with the Greater Victoria Housing Society there.
Great. Thank you very much.